Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Stronger Program series presented by Rogers Athletic. My name is Pat Cohan, and our guest for today's show is Dr. Brad Bates, the Vice President of Collegiate Sports Associates, an executive search and consulting firm used by some of the most elite collegiate athletic departments and conferences. In our conversation, we're going to talk about fundraising, the missed opportunities at the high school level. Before we dive into these topics, we do want to thank our partner, Rogers Athletic, the premier provider of football practice and pendulum strength training equipment. In this Rogers Stronger Program series, we're talking to athletic directors, coaches, and trainers to help high schools build stronger athletic departments through improved structure, process, and better care for their athletes. To learn more about Rogers Athletic, visit go.rogersathletic.com/insider. Brad, thanks so much for joining us.
Pat, it's really an honor. I appreciate the opportunity.
So a little bit more about Dr. Bates before we get going. He played football under Bo Schembechler at the University of Michigan. He was a head strength and conditioning coach at the University of Colorado and Vanderbilt University. He's a director of athletics for Miami of Ohio for 10 years. And then he was the director of athletics for Boston College for 5 years before he started his career at Collegiate Sports Associates. So Brad, in your 15 years as a collegiate director of athletics, where do you see maybe opportunities for high schools to start catching up to the colleges and finding that those other forms of fundraising for their programs?
Yeah, great. So, Pat, my father was a high school coach and teacher his entire professional life. So I grew up at our local high school, which was just an ideal childhood for me. The challenge, of course, as our athletic directors and coaches who are looking in know, is they've got more than full-time jobs to begin with. And so often the difficulty is you don't have people who can specialize in fundraising. So what I've seen, the model that's worked very, very effectively is where there's delegation to alums who are very passionate about their sports program. So you engage particularly former student athletes who are alums of the high schools, and they work closely with teammates, maybe by sport, maybe by class. Captains are often really good leaders in terms of engaging their classmates and staying in touch. And so rather than becoming full-time jobs or a significant attribute of their responsibilities, what I see are a lot of administrators and coaches who are delegating to student athlete alums who can engage the community of people who are probably most inclined and passionate to give and support the program.
How does that conflict with maybe the big donors or in the high school space, the booster clubs, right? There are people that are passionate about these programs that want to have a role and want to, have control. And so when you start electing others to be involved in that process or to have a bigger role maybe than this person that's given a lot of money, how does that work out?
Yeah, and I think the key word in your question is control.
Yeah.
Who wants control, right? It's really how you manage expectations. And as an athletic director or coach, how you manage the expectations of supporting and participating. Ultimately, the investment in a student's growth and development should be this noble opportunity for charitable contributions. And if expectations are managed around that overarching aim, I think that for the most part, it's much easier to integrate a structured system of fundraising in many ways. So approaching it from the outcomes, which is a holistic development of student athletes, I think is a really good place to start.
One of the conflicts with fundraising, though, that happens at any school at any level is, say the football program wants the money they raise to go to football, and the volleyball program wants the money they raise to go to volleyball. So what's the best way to organize that to maximize the impact on the fundraising for the entire athletic department and not just one program?
Yeah, I don't know that there's one easy answer. At the collegiate level, what they do is they have for years given benefits to your contributions. And so giving unrestricted gifts, you tend to get more points or some sort of benefit that gives you better seats or closer proximate parking. And so there are systems in place that reward unrestricted giving over restricted giving.
Now, describe that right there. What,
Oh yeah, go ahead.
define those two, because I mean, I don't think at the high school level we're always defining the different gifts that we're receiving.
Yeah, very good. So as an athletic administrator, I always loved unrestricted gifts because that allowed me to set the priorities on how that money would be spent. So if you have a donor who's passionate about the school but doesn't have a specific target for their contributions, then that gives the autonomy to the school's leadership to determine at that point in time where that money can best be allocated to help student athlete development. Restricted gifts, to your question more specifically, of course, if I were a high school coach in a specific sport, I would want restricted gifts just to my program to benefit my program. If we approach this, though, from the standpoint that in all likelihood, a vast majority of your student athlete alums are not currently giving, which is clearly the case at the collegiate level. So I'm making an assumption that at the secondary level, it's probably fairly similar. Then the breadth of opportunity exists in a way that I think you can create a context where you're not cannibalizing one another and competing against one another between restricted gifts and unrestricted gifts. The other thing I would say is most administrators are completely fine with restricted giving to specific sports. The problem is if you have certain sports that have greater opportunity to give. So for example, football has higher roster numbers. Therefore, they probably have a larger alumni base. Therefore, they probably have greater financial opportunity to give to the program, as opposed to a golf program that wouldn't have as extensive an alumni base to draw from. But again, potential within those groups will have an impact as well.
So when we talk about restricted versus unrestricted and we manage, as an athletic director or somebody in charge of that fundraising piece, how do you manage those dynamics though? The individuals that are involved with that. I'm the wrestling coach all of a sudden has a big donor. Well, I want it all in my facility, but maybe for the last 5 years, I've received pretty good funds from maybe the basketball donors or the football donors. So, I mean, as an athletic director, how do you manage all those egos?
Yeah, really good question. So I think you have to be upfront with your coaches because you want to be working with your coaches directly. But as a group, you also have to identify what your priorities are and do a needs analysis for the department. And that certainly evolves over time. So as you construct a new weight room, for example, then that becomes less of a priority and you focus on what the next priorities are. And you do it in a way that incentivizes your coaches and your staff to fundraise and engage the community, but also you do it in a way where people see that they're engaged and that as an athletic director, you understand what their individual program priorities are. The second thing I would say is you can organize, as you mentioned earlier, Pat, the booster groups. You can organize booster groups in ways that really assist in your overall priorities while also identifying with the student athlete alums, for example, what the sports specific priorities are. And then I would say annually identify what those priorities are and do it in a way that's communicated extensively to your potential supporters. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think the overarching thing, the question that is in the back of my head and probably the back of every head football coach's head is, I bring in a lot of money as a football staff, and that money really fuels the program, but then also in effect of our football program doing well and having the resources it needs to be successful, that's going to indirectly make every other program better. So why should I give up my money that's raised by my booster club to give and spread it out, limiting the amount of resources I have for my football program to help everybody else when it doesn't, connect to what I can put on the field? Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And that's clearly a conversation that takes place at the collegiate level as well.
Yeah.
And there are multiple answers to it, but to give a general response to your question, it really has to do with what the priorities are overarching for the department and within each program. those priorities that are overarching for the department are obviously going to be weighed heavily towards revenue production. And
Yeah.
so investing in programs that are going to assist in that revenue production is just makes sense for the entire athletic department as well as those particular programs. Again, though, I would suggest that, and this is true at the collegiate level as well, there are a lot more alums who are not giving than are giving currently. And so I think that the potential of engaging alums in both restricted and unrestricted ways is there because there are so many potential donors out there. And we haven't even talked about the non-alums, the fans, the season ticket holders, the people that live in the community, corporate giving, and those sorts of things. So I don't know that you have to get bogged down in those specifics, because I think the potential out there gives you opportunity.
Yeah, I just find it interesting. I've never been asked once by my high school that I went to give back. But Oregon State, where I went, is asking me every single month. I get a new flyer or a new call, somebody on the rowing team's calling me up and saying, hey, can you give to the Beavs? They always have it pretty dialed in. I mean, there's consistent requests until I turn them off, right? But I've never been asked by my high school, which has been interesting as you say that.
And again, at a Power 5 school like Oregon State, they have the staff and they have a structure that's integrated. It's much harder at the high school level because you don't have the personnel or the specialization within the fundraising domain at most institutions anyway.
So I was a rower at Oregon State. If a rowing athlete calls me, I'm automatically giving $50. Like if they make the call. But if a Juneau Douglas high school football player called me, I would automatically give $50, like automatically, just for making the call because it had such a big impact on me. But again, they don't have the staffs, they don't have the organization to do that. It's interesting hearing you say that because I would be a sucker for it every time. So.
And Pat, you just brought up two really critical parts of fundraising. The first one is the connectivity. Mm-hmm. I mean, when a student athlete calls you, all of a sudden you have a personal attachment.
I've been there.
Much deeper. Yeah, you've been there, but you also probably look up their bio on their website. You want to know more about that person. You follow their career. And if there are opportunities post-graduation for you to assist, you're probably going to cultivate and help that relationship. In addition to that, you're also instilling in those students who are calling you a sense of obligation and giving back when they're able to long after graduation.
Yeah. Well, and you just appreciate somebody that takes the effort to call and have a conversation with you. I mean, more and more every year it gets more and more rare that somebody's just reaching out just to talk, right?
The one thing I would add to this, and this is often overlooked at the collegiate level, but if high school coaches can now instill that sense of obligation of giving back, and it doesn't have to be millions of dollars, but if they can provide the context for the current students understanding what supporters are making possible for their experience, that's going to be as powerful as anything and will benefit the high school and future coaches and administrators for many years.
I think that's 100% true. And I, again, did not really see that at my high school as much as probably I should have, because we went on trips, we did some pretty expensive things, and I don't know, beyond the parents of the team, I don't know who actually gave to that personally.
Yeah, and so there's where the potential is, right?
Yeah, 100%.